21 masterclasses in new consciousness, new ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you. Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world. Hello, Om Shanti, and welcome to today's masterclass, one of 21 masterclasses in new consciousness, a series that will be exploring new ways of thinking, being and doing in today's rapidly changing world. We're all of us trying to observe the current regulations for our physical safety, but are we equally observing the spiritual laws that are there to keep us calm and keep us protected in these difficult times? My name is Philippa, and I'll be with you throughout this series as we listen to the experiences of yogis and meditators from countries right around the world, as they share with us their tools for navigating these challenging times. Each of the speakers are students and teachers of the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University. As the name suggests, it's a university for the spirit, for understanding the self and the soul. It has teaching centres in over 110 countries throughout the world and an active presence in even more countries than that. It was established in India in 1936 through a series of visions and teachings that came through the original founder, Brahma Baba, teachings which were aimed specifically at this transitional period that humanity is going through right now. The founder decided early on that women should be put in front, making the Brahma Kumaris the largest organisation of its kind in the world to be led by women. Well, today's masterclass is on the topic of walking the line between loving and letting go. Now, I think all of us understand the need to love and be loved, but what happens when that love moves into dependency? Do we become blind, and does it cloud our thinking? And what happens if we're in a situation that does actually require us to let go? Does our attachment keep us locked in and stop us from seeing clearly what we should be doing? Well, today's speaker on this topic is someone who has been a student and a teacher with the Brahma Kumaris for nearly 40 years. His name is Neville Hodgkinson from the UK, and he is an author and journalist and has been writing on the theme of health and medicine throughout many of those years. His books, as a writer, he's written a book called I Know How to Live, I Know How to Die, the teachings of Daddy Janki, who was the head of the Brahma Kumaris up until her death in March this year, 2020, when she died at the age of 104. And Neville's other book, Will to Be Well, the Real Alternative Medicine. Neville, welcome to the programme, and thanks for being on Masterclasses.
Nice to be with you, Philippa.
Now, you're joining us from Worthing on the south coast of England in a retreat centre that overlooks the sea.
That's right. It's not a bad place to be locked down. I do feel very fortunate about it, because 50% of our environment is this lovely, clean, fresh sea and sky and fresh air. And
so you're looking out onto that, which is so nice.
Actually looking out onto it too, yes.
Yeah, lovely. So, Neville, if you cast your mind back 40 years to when you began this journey, you were a print journalist working for a national newspaper, had quite a scientific medical point of view. You were married with 2 boys in a busy and lively household. Looking back now, how do you feel you were at that time? How do you see yourself now, looking back to that point?
I feel that I was very driven and really quite fragile in a way, even though externally things looked okay. I worked very hard. I did well. I'd had several years as a specialist writer on the Daily Mail, their medical and science correspondent. Before that, I had a title called Social Policy Correspondent, a bit of an obscure one, on the Times. But one way and another, things were okay externally. I enjoyed finding out about health and medicine especially. I really loved that the illumination that brought to me personally. And during that time, I gravitated especially towards doctors who had an orientation towards the mind and the part that it played in making us vulnerable to illness or in keeping us well. So that prepared me in a way for a journey that was very different from the materialistic way that I'd lived for some years. But that materialism, with my wife working very hard as well, also high-powered newspaper work. And there was a time just a few months before many changes started happening in my life where I arrived back in the home early one afternoon and I found our two boys fighting quite seriously, and I felt there just isn't enough love in this home. We were leading such a hectic, driven lifestyle, and I really felt this is not the way to live. There's something wrong here. And that was the beginning of a whole new way of thinking about life and myself and my relationships.
And obviously you had an encounter with the Brahma Kumaris and started learning their meditation, which is Raja Yoga meditation. And throughout this series, we're going to be exploring different aspects of that meditation. But today we're looking very much at this aspect of loving and letting go. And as I said, most people understand loving. But what about the letting go? Why is that important?
I don't think most people do understand loving, actually. I think it's very commonly confused with what in spiritual speak they call it attachment. And it's not a bad word, actually. To begin with, I felt to be undetached felt like being cold or distant, but it's not. Actually, attachment is a distortion on your heart and your mind, where it's as if part of your psyche has become over-invested in some other individual, or it might be in your job, or it might be in your house or possessions. So much of you has been invested in things that are actually ultimately outside of yourself. And what this does is it creates an insecurity inside. And I think that was beginning to creep up on me. I'd invested so much in my relationship with Liz, my wife, that it was a great threat to me that she was wanting to pursue her own career, to be more individual, to be a modern feminist, self-aggrandizing woman, you could almost say. And she was a great mum, and she was a great fun to live with. But this attachment that I had was actually creating a lot of sorrow inside because of the insecurity that was coming as Liz was wanting to break out of the sort of wife at home image and forge ahead and make her own career.
So I guess this aspect of feeling that you were loving in a way that had to meet your needs rather than just a love that could accept the other as they are, that was your first clue that it wasn't a real love, that it was a kind of dependency or an attachment, as you're saying.
That was my first clue, although it wasn't even as conscious as that. But I do, looking back, realise that a lot of insecurity was developing inside me because of the changing nature of the relationship. And if I'd been truly loving, I would have been happy that Liz should follow her own instincts, follow the life that she wanted to lead. It didn't mean separating, it didn't mean not being a good mum, but it somehow challenged my image of the relationship. And that was creating this insecurity inside, which is a clue, as you put it, that it wasn't real love, it was something more selfish, something where I was in a state of neediness rather than real love, I think, always gives.
So from where you sit now, would you see letting go as a necessary part of a spiritual practice?
Yes, but I also see, and this is controversial in a way, or let's say debatable, that I also see as an element of attachment as being a legitimate part of life, in the sense that, a mother has attachment with her young child, and it's more than she, of course, she wants to give to that child, but there's also a defensiveness that if, for example, her child was being criticised by a neighbour, she probably rightly, this is a really debatable subject, but probably rightly, would want her feeling would be, I want to defend my child. Whereas true love, in the sense that where mature love, which I think all attachment relationships should develop into, we should go beyond attachment into a mature love, which only gives, only frees. And that's where the letting go comes in. But there's a beautiful few lines by the poet William Blake that for me summarizes what I really feel is what I've been learning to do through the practice of spiritual study and meditation with the Brahma Kumaris. He wrote, I'm not quite sure what poem it came from, but I remember these lines: "He who bends to himself a joy doth the living life destroy." You can imagine a butterfly's coming past and you think, oh, that's nice, and you reach out and grab it and it's dead. You've killed it. And that can happen in relationships too. So he who bends to himself a joy doth the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. I love that. I feel that's such a great goal for how to live. And that, to me, is really got it right, this line between loving and letting go. You can love when it's there in front of you. You kiss the joy. It doesn't, you can appreciate what's in front of you. But when the time comes for it to have passed, why suffer and why cause others to suffer by trying to hold on to something after its time?
I love that idea of kissing something as it goes by, because it suggests this really beautiful light touch that
Exactly.
You don't have to grasp at it.
Exactly. So you're loving, but it's that's a very nice way of putting it. It's a light touch, so that yes, you're loving. It's someone's in front of you. Why shouldn't you love? But it's not a binding. It's not a holding. It's not a bondage either on your part or towards the other.
But if we drill into this letting go, it does seem a conundrum that on the one hand you're saying there are so many benefits from having this light touch, and yet human nature, we cling on to our job because it gives us a role and meaning in life. We cling on to our relationships because they give us a status, our possessions, our car, because they make us happy. Why is the human nature geared in such a way as we hold on to these things when actually they're not enabling us to be free? And yet we can't let go. Why is there this dilemma, this conundrum at the heart of this issue?
I don't think it has to be like that. And in fact, I'm pretty clear that it doesn't have to be like that on the basis of the degree to which I have become free. It's not complete, the job's still in progress, but many of the things that used to really be very difficult for me in my life have come right now because of an answer that has come through the spiritual practice. And this, in order to answer your question about this conundrum, I think you have to bring in a sense of relationship to something more subtle than the material level. The thing is that everything at the material level comes and goes. It's in the nature of matter. Bodies come and go, epochs come and go. This laptop that is in front of me will come and go. It'll have its days and then it'll be out of date or it'll break. Everything comes and goes that is physical. But the spiritual is unlimited. The spirit, which lies at the other side, it's like a dimension of reality which science is only just beginning to explore, actually. It's like an informational dimension of reality which gives rise to the material world. So, it's clear, if you think about it, that everything around you in the material world has got some kind of intelligence that puts it there. There's an intelligence that informs the life of a tree, or there's an intelligence that created the table in front of me. All of these things have been shaped by an intelligence, and the beauty of connecting to that deeper level of things is that you can move into, as William Blake said, you can move into eternity's sunrise. It's like you're moving into a zone of happiness and joy and appreciation that doesn't depend on the immediate material and always changing material level. So that's what I've found. That's kind of the theory of it. But in practice, the way it has happened for me has been that from the start, when I met the Brahma Kumaris, they said, you need two things to change. One is how you think about yourself. You have to stop thinking of yourself as a lump of matter and start understanding that there's a deeper dimension to you, which in religious language you call the soul. And secondly, you have to practice engaging with the original nature of that soul in relationship to the divine, to a source of unbroken beauty and love and peace. So many of at the core of so many of the great faiths, the great spiritual traditions, there is this sense that there's a higher self that has perhaps been lost through the journey through life, but that there is also a source which is like an unchanging reference point of everything that's highest in us. That's how I've understood this. And when I learned how to connect with that beautiful reference point for what was my original nature, it's as if that sort of fills me from the inside. And as that filling takes place, these dependencies disappear. It's wonderful. I'm amazed how natural it is. It did take time. It's really taken a good number of years to see the fruits of this, because to begin with, it feels quite painful. You're letting go of things that are important to you, because there's a bit of a catch-22 in this as well, that you have a certain amount of letting go is needed before you can connect to that beautiful, empowering source.
Well, you've touched there on the forever sunrise in Blake's poem, this eternal consciousness that is out there. And I'd like to ask you more about that in a moment. But before we do, can I just drill in a little bit more into your actual lived experience of letting go?
Yes.
Because at the beginning of this journey that we talked about, you were living in a fantastically beautiful house. You had financial success. Money was not an issue. Social life, possessions, in a way, everything a man could possibly want. And yet, throughout your journey, that has been whittled away to the point where your possessions are now very few. You live very simply. By choice, you have given away a lot of what you had. Where for you were the pinch points? You've kind of alluded to them, but what did you find hardest in that journey of going from one place to the place that you're in now? Because a lot of people might be struggling themselves with those different speed bumps, the hiccups that you get along the line.
It's a really good way of referring to it, and I think they're different for different people. I think one of the reasons why I took to the spiritual path fairly readily, I found from the beginning, even when I didn't understand much, that meditation, that sitting with practiced yogis was somehow doing the repair work inside me that was needed. So I got that straight away, but there were some ways in which my nature was quite detached already. For example, I remember that even when we lived in a beautiful 5-storey Georgian house by the river in a beautiful part of London, I remember saying to Liz, my wife, from time to time, if this all disappeared, if we came back from a dinner party and found it all burned down, I don't think I would mind all that much. There was something in me that knew that somehow all of those material possessions were here today, gone tomorrow. I was fairly light about that. But the real speed bump for me that really held me back was a really tough one, was my relationship with Liz. Not so much our sons. I'd seen a lot of them. I'd had a very loving relationship with them from a young age, actually, because in their earliest years, when Liz was trying to get going as a journalist, I used to take care of them in the mornings because I had an evening job on the newspaper. So I used to spend a lot of time with them when they were young, and I had a very lovely relationship with them that was quite easy. But Liz was something else. Somehow Liz had meant so much to me. It was like I thought it was love, but really it was a deep dependency, a deep neediness on that person. And actually, as time went on, eventually I was going to have to lose Liz, even though going beyond eventually to another eventually, she was in a strange way to return to my life.
So it did come to completion. It did blossom and reach a place of fulfillment, actually.
It has, that really took some while. What happened was that for the first 7 years of my practice of this Raja Yoga, I was still with my family. And so the boys grew up. One was just going to university. The other one was just in his last year at university. And partly because of the way I was mishandling myself, I see it now, but also because of other dynamics, and including Liz's own needs. She said, Nev, I think we really need to separate. I don't want us to... we married young, we had a family young, we've been together 25 years. I think it's time we went our different ways. And I really didn't like the idea at all. And I went to ask one of the senior sisters in London about this issue. Remember, this is about 7 or 8 years after I'd started this practice. So she knew me and Liz quite well. And I said to her, Liz wants us to separate. What do you think I should do? And this sister said, do you love Liz? I said, yes. And she said, well, you'll want to do what Liz wants then, won't you? This was so clever. I mean, in a way, it was also unkind. I mean, at one level, it has actually worked out really well. But it meant that we parted amicably. I immediately saw the logic of that, but I was miserable for some years afterwards because my heart felt as if a chunk of it had been torn away.
It's lovely. Yeah, it's lovely to hear that because it kind of makes your story a real story, that you didn't just fall from the sky as a sort of perfectly formed yogi. You have really had to work and struggle and overcome different things. Yes. You mentioned there talking to one of the senior teachers at the Brahma Kumaris, and I know you had a very close relationship with Daddy Janki, who sadly passed away just a couple of months ago in March. What did you learn from her on this topic of finding the balance between being loving and letting go?
I would say from her, she showed me what I've alluded to, but I don't do it anything like as much as she did right through her life, which was to form that relationship with the Supreme Being. That expression, Supreme Being, God, Supreme Soul, it meant nothing to me when I started all of this. I remember I was an atheist, I was a materialist, I had a very yuppie lifestyle, and even though there was pressures building up inside, stress from having a lot of dependency on doing well in my work and all the rest of it, and maybe sensing somehow that there wasn't enough love in the relationships in the home, despite all of that, when I met Daddy Janki, I could see that her being was one where there was no question of it being a difficult dividing line for her. She was just with God. She really was. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I could tell from her being, from the unlimited way that she would be loving with everyone who came in front of her and would immediately move on to the next scene, whatever was happening. Even if someone was being unpleasant, she wouldn't allow that to impact her. If someone was being very full of praise of her, she wouldn't let that impact her either. She'd really learnt not to take anything from this external world, but to take all her sense of her self-worth through her relationship with the divine. And that example was the biggest lesson for me throughout the 40 years I knew her. She did it with tremendous dedication, extraordinary, but she showed what's possible. I always had the feeling that she tried to do for us in the West and outside India, what Brahma Baba, the founder of the Spiritual University, had done for her and the other founding sisters in India, because he too had given tremendous dedication to only allowing God to inform his heart and his mind and his thinking. He drew on God's love and wisdom all the time, not seeking any recognition for himself. And Daddy was the same, Daddy Janki was the same. So if you're still needy, you want to put yourself up in colours, you want to have your name glorified, you might be wanting to have a higher seat than someone else, all these things that bedevil human relationships. But if you really take everything from God, you don't need any of that nonsense. You just move through life loving what comes in front of you and moving on moment by moment. I haven't achieved that, but that lesson that Daddy showed me of how to live, which I think also would have helped her in dying because she would be ready to move on, that lesson has been hugely valuable for me. It's really, really informed how I do my work, how I do lead my relationships, and they have become much more giving. I am much less needy than I was, which is, I'm so grateful to these teachings for that.
So you've alluded to this spectrum with unhealthy dependency and attachment to stuff on the one hand, and the experience of the forever eternal sunrise on the other hand, which in your language you're describing as God. Can you flesh out a little bit what you mean by that? What is that experience that you're having let go and having entered into this state of love? What is it you're loving in that experience?
You're, in a funny way, you're loving love. It's a state of being. In India and in a lot of the East, there's an understanding of God being omnipresent, and I don't find that useful. I value something in the Brahma Kumaris teachings, which is that the soul itself has, through its long journey through time, has got flaws in the way it sees itself and sees others, and it carries them from birth to birth. So the soul has lost its truth, but underneath those distortions, there is the original truth. It's always there waiting. We've all come from God. We're all the children of God, is the way we put it in the Brahma Kumaris. We have that one mother and father, that source, that reference point, as I referred to it earlier. And because we are the children of God, the truth of the love and the peace and the bliss, the pure consciousness that God is, are in us as well. And so the way to renew that is to actively choose no longer to allow yourself to have that love and peace destroyed or impeded by objects, relationships, things that happen, the frustrations of everyday life. They will occur. You have to negotiate life. You're still here in life. Those frustrations will occur, but you start to learn how to see, oh, I don't feel so good about this. Now, why? And then when you turn the camera inwards and look at yourself, you realize, oh, this person really annoyed me because my ego got hurt. And ego is like a narrow sense of self, to do with the self that's constructed in your brain, rather than the soul, the deeper aspect of the self. So in that way, as you negotiate life, the frustrations, the hurts, they still come, but you quickly turn them to your advantage by seeing that, oh, no, that's not original to me. I don't need that anymore. I don't want that anymore. And that is the key. You can connect. It's terribly simple, actually. God is unbelievably simple. I didn't get this for years, I have to say. But now I see God as being unbelievably simple. It's like an inner presence that I can know when I am aware of myself as a spiritual being and have let go of my identification with what I look like, with my nationality, with my age, with my job, with my family, when inside I just can connect myself to that beautiful awareness that I am a being of love and peace and bliss. And I've got so much to be appreciative of, that is the truth, and that I'm getting my way back to that. Once you kind of make a choice for some positive feelings of that kind, you're on the right track for reconnecting to the power source. It's a very odd thing. It's not really as if it's separate from you, and yet it is. You're not God. I'm very clear about that because I've got all of these imperfections, but the way to know God is not to dwell on your imperfections and think, oh, I'm a miserable sinner kind of thing, which was a little bit what I picked up in my early days going to local church, but much more, no, there are the imperfections, but let me focus on what is good in me and in others, and that focus somehow it puts you on the same wavelength as God, so that internally you can feel that God becoming more and more your companion as you move through life. That's an amazing thing. He's not something sitting up on a cloud, or throwing thunderbolts. He's just some sort of beautiful inner sense of truth. And this is the new consciousness that I think is accessible to all of us, that will take us forward and will really help us through some tough times ahead.
And it's that relationship that creates the magic in your life that helps you get through these experiences.
Totally. In fact, I was struggling until the penny dropped. I really am a soul, and I really am a child of God. I could do all sorts of other things. I could have bliss. I could be carried off into bliss. I think probably my brain is well endowed with endorphin receptors or something like that. So right from the start, when I came into contact with yogis, I used to sit in front of them and I was blissed out just by the beautiful vibrations. But I don't think that's real yoga. That's, again, a kind of dependency. It took me a long time. The cognitive shift had to happen inside, that I really am a soul and a child of God. When that penny dropped, it became so much easier for me just to know that it's never far away for me to top up the battery with that inner connection. And then, because the battery is well charged, as I move through life, it's more giving, and hence everything works out better when you're more giving. But when you're needy, you get frustrated, you get angry because people are not meeting your needs. So if you can meet your needs spiritually, you can make yourself free. It's a simple formula, but not so simply done.
Some people listening to this might have formed the impression that it's necessary to walk away from big chunks of your life. Maybe, as you've talked in your experience, even give up a relationship or a career or whatever. And yet within the Brahma Kumaris, there is this understanding of, once you've made that shift, the car can still be there, the job can still be there, those things can still all be in your life, but you're relating to them from a different standpoint. So you're not going off into the jungle or sitting in a cave and renouncing the world. You're very much in the world with these things still around you, but operating and interacting in a new way. Is that how you would say it?
Yes, definitely. And in fact, it was interesting that we still on a regular basis hear discourses that were given by the founder, Brahma Baba. And just recently, one of these was saying that he was chiding, actually, probably, some of the people who were sitting in front of him, who were perhaps in a protected environment of the ashram. And he was saying that people who are practicing this in their homes with their families, they can move faster. Because, if you distance yourself too much from the challenges that reveal where you still need to do work on yourself, you could be living in a cloud cuckoo land. You won't move forward well. You might fool yourself that you're doing well, but actually you'll be stuck. What's beautiful about this practice is that it does encourage you, yes, to begin with, actually, some degree of healing may be needed, and we all differ in that. So I'm amused when the sisters say that the spiritual university is a hospital come university. So to begin with, you sort of certainly need a certain amount of healing, and I feel that I needed that. So I was very fortunate that I was away from my full-on newspaper job for a couple of years when I started. I was writing a book, and I don't think I'd have been able to establish the practice that has sustained me all these years if I'd still been in the hectic environment of the newspaper office. But when I returned to the newspaper office after that couple of years, I was a different person already. That really had changed. I feel I left one job with my tail between my legs in a way, because I'd let it burn me out. But when I went back, armed with this knowledge of how to meditate, I didn't really have proper understanding, but already I was taking benefit. And I was more considerate of colleagues. I was much less sensitive to criticism. I was braver in what I would do. So a lot of changes happened really quite quickly, especially in my work. The tough ones for me were the personal relationships. And in that case, sometimes, because in the early days of the Brahma Kumaris, quite a lot of the sisters had to leave their family environment because the families were so against them joining this, because it was something very new. And there was a whole load of reasons why it was controversial. But not all. And even though that happened in the early days, nowadays, I remember one chap in London telling me what the untold story of the Brahma Kumaris is the number of relationships they've helped to keep together. Because, you know, when you have this dependency, it leads to a lot of irritation with a partner. But when you become more self-sufficient, you know, you can be together like a couple, but not entwined with one another, which just restricts your freedom so that you get angry and upset. But when you're like this, you can face the world together, but you're free. And I'm so glad that my relationship with Liz has evolved into something like that now. And in a way, I'm regretful that it needed those years where I lost the family life after our boys had grown up. I was quite sad during that time. But in my case, probably destiny knew what I needed. And so it was probably a good thing to become free of that dependency. And then now I've returned to that relationship with Liz, which is just two really good friends who understand each other well and who have shared that time living with our sons, and we share the fun of watching them make their own way in life. But we're individual, not entwined. And I'm very appreciative of that.
When we look at the world now and how much change is going on for so many people in so many parts of their life, whether it be relationships or whether it be their job, their career, their health, bereavement, I mean, we are living through, the word unprecedented keeps on being used, but they are exceptional times. This lesson that we've talked about in today's masterclass, it's not just a sort of abstract philosophy, it's actually a very practical tool for learning how to cope with loss and how to cope with change and keep your equilibrium and keep your sense of self. There's a very practical element to this, isn't there?
Very much so, yes. I would say, really, when going back all those years, I was 37 actually when this began, and I'm now 76, so it's a long period of time that I've been doing it. At 37, I was really, I would say, on the edge of a nervous breakdown or something of the sort, because I didn't actually sort of break down, but I was definitely feeling life just doesn't make sense. I'm working so hard, and yet it seemed to be such a treadmill, you know, and the harder you worked, the more people seemed to ask of you. Whereas so quickly, when I started to learn to think of myself in a way that was separate from the roles I was playing, that was such a practical tool. That sense that I don't have to define myself by my stories in the newspaper. I do my best, but if one day it works out and another day it doesn't, don't let yourself go up and down in your feelings. That just wears you out. But instead, do your best and treat it more as a game. I've noticed that the top people in industry and business, very often they talk about their players. They have this detachment about their role, and they're often very high rollers. You know, they earn masses of money, And they do really well because they've got this element of detachment about the part they're playing. And they can take the swings with the roundabouts. You know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. They will move through all of these things and they won't be put off by it. They'll still love life. And that's something that I'd lost, I feel, that hungry ego and the neediness in relationships. But now I've regained it, which is amazing.
Well, that feels like a wonderful place to just take a pause and maybe experience a few moments of meditation. If you could just guide us a little bit with your own thinking process, and let's just share together a few moments of loving and letting go in meditation. Thank you, Neville. That would be lovely.
Thanks, Philippa. It begins with something quite physical, actually, a sort of sense of wanting to kiss, like kissing the joy as it flies. A sense of counting your blessings, these ancient wisdoms, they all help. A sense of gratitude. These feelings where you dwell on little and big blessings that you experience in life, they put you on the right wavelength for connecting to this one that I've described as the reference point of what is highest in me and in all of the human family. You can't connect with God as long as you are fretting. It's like interference. You can't tune in to that broadcast. And what is the broadcast? It's so simple. It's a sense of love and joy that is independent of anything that is happening externally. It's a consciousness, but a very pure consciousness that hasn't lost itself in the material dimension. That's why God is such a beautiful resource. All of us humans come and play the game here, and it's perfectly natural that at times we lose sight of those deeper realities. But now more than ever, it feels it's the time to renew our ability to feel our truth.
Thank you, Neville. It feels like you haven't just given us a tool, but actually a whole toolkit of practical, wise and insightful ways in which we truly can navigate the emotions of this current era, and a lot to take away and in our own meditation and quiet times really reflect on in our own lives and in the way that we are going about our day-to-day living. So Neville Hodgkinson, thank you so much for being with us for today's masterclass. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Philippa.
Thank you. And thanks to you as well for joining us. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow for our next in our series of 21 masterclasses in new consciousness. Until then, take care, keep safe, Om Shanti, and goodbye. 21 masterclasses in new consciousness, new ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you. Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world.